In less than a year, 4 men tore through the south of England, leaving behind a trail of smashed shop fronts, destroyed businesses, and millions in losses. They weren't armed with guns. They didn't wear ski masks. What they had were stolen Range Rovers, sledgehammers, and a taste for destruction. This was a ram raid gang with a difference, organized, ruthless, and completely without fear. Their attacks weren't subtle. They were loud, violent, and surgical, using high-end stolen cars to batter their way into jewelers, petrol stations, and convenience stores. Over 10 months, they hit more than a dozen targets, ripping ATMs out of walls and clearing out safes in minutes. Their total haul, over £1.2 million. But the damage they left behind was even greater. Nearly £2 million worth, not including lost earnings for devastated shop owners. The gang was good. Too good. Until the flying squad, the Met's elite robbery unit, got involved. What followed was a months-long surveillance operation, a tense sting, and a takedown that finally brought one of the UK's most destructive gangs to justice. This is the story of the Ram Raid crew who thought they could never be stopped, and the day they ran out of road. It started with a bang, literally. In the early hours of November 2021, central London became the stage for a brazen, well-executed raid. A stolen Land Rover, repurposed as a battering ram, was driven straight through the reinforced glass frontage of a high-end jeweler. Alarms blared as masked figures poured in, smashing display cases and clearing shelves of luxury watches and jewellery. Less than 5 minutes later, the gang vanished into the night, leaving behind only a torched vehicle and a crime scene soaked in adrenaline and disbelief. It was fast, fierce, and devastating, and it was just the beginning. What followed wasn't a pause, but an escalation. Within weeks, similar attacks were reported across the south of England. In Berkshire and Hampshire, petrol stations were torn open in the dead of night, their ATMs hauled out with industrial chains and stuffed into waiting 4x4s. In Dorset, convenience stores were gutted, safes ripped from walls, tills destroyed, and frontages reduced to rubble. One of the most destructive early hits came in Poole, where a black Range Rover ploughed through the front of a co-op, sending fruit and shelves flying as the crew made off with cash from a stolen ATM. The pattern was unmistakable. Every strike followed a template. A stolen SUV, often a Range Rover or Land Rover, outfitted with cloned plates to throw off police, and used with brutal precision. Once the raid was complete, the vehicles were abandoned and burned, eliminating fingerprints, DNA, and forensic clues. Tools of the trade, grinders, crowbars, sledgehammers, were left behind, often still warm from use. But it wasn't just the scale of destruction that alarmed investigators. It was the method. CCTV footage revealed suspects dressed head to toe in black, faces obscured by balaclavas, moving with calculated efficiency. These weren't reckless smash-and-grab bandits. They were a unit, quick, quiet, and methodical. The cleanup told the real story. Each raid had been executed with a level of discipline and control that suggested military-style planning, and someone was orchestrating it. Behind the chaos stood 4 men. William Connors, a career criminal with prior burglary convictions. Darren Eastaugh, infamous for his role in the 2017 break-in at John Terry's mansion after spotting the footballer's holiday photos online. Anthony Rodwell, a convicted ATM thief who once blew up cash machines across Thames Valley. And then there was Sebastian Gnip, the outlier. No criminal record, no known links to organised gangs, but broke, isolated, and desperate enough to become a willing recruit. Together they formed a crew with a simple motto: in, out, and gone before anyone could react. Over the next 10 months, they would leave behind a trail of broken businesses and stolen millions, confident that no one could stop them. But someone was already watching. The gang's strength lay not in brute force alone, but in their methodical, almost surgical execution. To the outside world, their raids looked wild. Glass shattered, storefronts obliterated, cash machines ripped out, safes dragged across floors like toys. But this wasn't blind chaos. Behind the destruction was a carefully crafted system. Every job followed the same cold formula. A high-powered SUV was sourced days in advance. Once secured, the car was fitted with cloned number plates, and a signal jammer was installed to block vehicle trackers. With that in place, the team was ready. They moved like clockwork. Each strike was designed for speed and shock. Armed with industrial tools, they would ram into their target with surgical precision. Doors and security shutters meant nothing. Within minutes, they were inside. ATMs were yanked from walls, tills smashed open, jewelry scooped from cases in a blur of motion. In and out in under 5 minutes, and every second counted. Alarms would sound, but by the time police were en route, the gang was already gone, vanishing into the night in a trail of scorched rubber and shattered glass. They didn't discriminate. Petrol stations, corner shops, high-end jewelers, all were fair game. In West London, they used a stolen Range Rover belonging to actor Richard E. Grant, taken while he quarantined in a hotel, to obliterate a Tesco Express. In Poole, they reversed into a co-op and dragged a £78,000 ATM down the aisle. In Wembley, Kenya Jewellers suffered £400,000 in damage during a raid that took just moments but left lasting devastation. Another petrol station was left so badly damaged it was forced to close for over a month. By the spring of 2022, their footprint was staggering. 14 confirmed burglaries, 33 thefts, 3 attempted break-ins, at least 23 stolen vehicles. The total damage? £1.8 million. But those were just the numbers. The emotional and economic cost ran far deeper. Family-owned businesses, many running for decades, were gutted. Some never reopened. Staff lost their jobs. Customers lost essential local services. Communities were left feeling vulnerable and under siege. And yet, despite the scale of their spree, the gang left police with almost nothing to trace. Vehicles were burned, tools abandoned. CCTV showed only masked figures in black. They operated like ghosts, always vanishing just as fast as they struck. For months, police across counties chased shadows following dead ends, but all that changed when the flying squad took control. Known for tackling the UK's most serious robberies, the elite unit brought new eyes, sharper tactics, and relentless focus, and from that moment the countdown began. By spring 2022, the Ram Raid crew had become a top priority for law enforcement. Their pattern of violent burglaries, the sheer scale of their operation, and their ability to slip through police nets made them one of the most elusive criminal groups operating in the UK. That's when the Metropolitan Police's flying squad stepped in. Known for tackling high-stakes robbery cases, the elite unit launched Operation Withen, a covert surveillance mission aimed at taking the gang down. The job was complex from the outset. The gang's strategy was slick and disciplined. They used stolen high-end vehicles, often torched within hours of a raid. They never targeted the same type of business twice in a row, and their hits spanned counties from London to Dorset, Hampshire to Berkshire, making coordination difficult. Most importantly, they left little forensic evidence behind. But the flying squad weren't chasing shadows. They were building patterns. Officers began linking the dots, tracing stolen cars recovered after raids, cross-referencing footage from shopfront CCTV, and monitoring pawn shops and black market fences where high-end watches and jewellery were turning up. The major breakthrough came in May 2022, when a dumped vehicle used in one of the early raids was forensically linked to William Connors. Surveillance teams began to quietly track his movements. It wasn't long before the picture started to form. Connors was regularly seen with Darren Eastaugh, Anthony Rodwell, and Sebastian Gnip. Their interactions were frequent, their movements deliberate. Phone records, vehicle sightings, and in-person meetings all pointed to one thing: this was the crew. The gang, the flying squad, had been hunting for months. For the next 6 months, officers built a case in silence. They tracked the group to lockups and storage sites. They watched handovers, late-night meetings, and suspicious journeys to remote areas. Piece by piece, the web tightened. Then came the chilling discovery. The gang was gearing up for another hit, likely in central London. It wasn't theory, it was imminent. With the threat of another ram raid hanging over the city, the flying squad made the call. The time for watching was over. Now, it was time to move. August 19th, 2022. Just before dawn in Reading. An Esso petrol station and Tesco Express sat in silence until the roar of a stolen black Range Rover shattered the calm. The vehicle rolled onto the forecourt, paused for a moment, then slammed in reverse straight through the storefront. Glass exploded, alarms blared, and the gang surged inside with practiced speed. Within seconds, they were tearing open tills, grabbing cash boxes and preparing to flee. But this time, they weren't the only ones in the dark. The flying squad had been watching for weeks. After months of surveillance under Operation Withen, they'd anticipated the next strike and were already waiting nearby. The second the vehicle made impact, officers moved. This wasn't a response, it was an ambush. William Connors was first to be confronted. He didn't go quietly. Lashing out at officers, he was tasered and brought to the ground. Darren Eastaugh tried to run. He bolted from the scene, weaving through residential streets and even cutting across a local primary school in a bid to vanish into the early morning shadows. But his escape was short-lived. Officers tracked and arrested him just minutes later. Meanwhile, Anthony Rodwell and Sebastian Gnip were located and detained in separate operations. A search of Gnip's home revealed a crucial piece of kit, a specialist device used to block GPS tracking on stolen vehicles. It was yet another link tying him directly to the gang's infrastructure. At the crime scene, officers combed through the Range Rover. Inside was a now familiar arsenal: sledgehammers, angle grinders, crowbars, and steel chains. These weren't just burglary tools, they were the gang's calling cards, the instruments that had smashed through 14 shops and left millions in damage. The arrests signaled the end of a 10-month spree that had left business owners devastated and detectives racing to catch up. For the flying squad, it was a textbook takedown, planned, timed, and flawlessly executed. For the gang, it was the end of the road. At Isleworth Crown Court in June 2023, the final chapter in the Ram Raid gang's violent spree was brought to a close. William Connors, Darren Eastaugh, Anthony Rodwell, and Sebastian Gnip stood side by side in the dock, facing justice after months of coordinated police work and courtroom proceedings. Between them, they had admitted to 53 offences, ranging from burglary and vehicle theft to attempted raids and widespread criminal damage. The scale of their criminal enterprise was laid bare. Over 10 months, they had ransacked shops, petrol stations and jewellers across southern England, leaving behind shattered storefronts, traumatised victims, and millions in damages and lost earnings. Judge Simon Davis didn't mince his words. He branded the group a professional team of burglars and ram raiders, highlighting the methodical planning and calculated violence that characterised their crime. This wasn't random opportunism, it was systematic. The gang had targeted small, often family-run businesses, many of which had served their communities for decades. The damage went beyond bricks and mortar. Staff were laid off, livelihoods were upended, and communities lost access to vital services. The emotional toll was just as severe, with victims left shaken, fearful, and in some cases, unable to reopen. The sentences reflected each man's role in the operation. Connors and Eastor, considered ringleaders and both with significant criminal records, received 6 years and 6 months each. Rodwell, whose driving skills had made him the designated getaway man, was sentenced to 5 years and 10 months. Gnip, the newest to crime and with no prior convictions, received 3 years for his part in the gang's final raid and involvement in the wider conspiracy. Following sentencing, Detective Inspector Ari Yoganathan praised the team behind the investigation and made it clear just how dangerous this group had been. Their ruthlessness knew no bounds. They would have kept going, targeting more shops, more vehicles, more lives. The damage they caused ran deep, and it's only right they face the consequences. The sentences were more than numbers. They were a line drawn under one of the most destructive ram raid sprees in recent UK history. For the victims and communities affected, it marked a moment of long overdue justice. The fallout from the gang's 10-month rampage stretched far beyond the broken shopfronts and stolen cash. It struck at the heart of small family-run businesses across southern England. For some, it marked the end of the road. Long-standing retailers, many serving their communities for decades, were forced to close their doors, unable to recover from the wreckage left behind. Staff lost jobs, shopkeepers lost livelihoods, and entire neighbourhoods lost vital services. One petrol station remained closed for 5 weeks following a raid, cutting off access for hundreds of daily customers. At Kenya Jewellers in Wembley, the financial and emotional toll was so severe that recovery never came. Their early morning strikes left behind more than just shattered glass and twisted shutters. They left trauma. Victims described feeling unsafe returning to work, some suffering sleepless nights. Many were forced to invest thousands in reinforced doors, alarms, and private security just to open their shops again. For those affected, the damage wasn't just material, it was mental, emotional, and deeply personal. And while Connors, Eastor, Rodwell, and Gnip now sit behind bars, the shadow of their crimes lingers. Their spree serves as a stark warning that organised crime doesn't always arrive quietly. Sometimes it comes with a roar of an engine, a flash of headlights, and the sound of metal shattering glass at 4 a.m. The flying squad may have ended this crew's destruction, but across the country, others are already watching, learning and waiting for their moment. The gang thought they were too fast to catch, too smart to trace. But the moment they reversed that final stolen 4x4 into another storefront, their countdown had already begun, and the Met's elite were already closing in.